Hello and welcome to the HIV Cure podcast. My name is Sakabo Sisala Marumo and we're bringing you HIV Cure information and the latest stuff in simple language. Today is episode 5 and we're back again. We're talking HIV vaccines, a game changer in HIV prevention and cure. You guys are the best of the best when it comes to breaking down these different topics. And today we're just going to learn about vaccines vaccines are very important when it comes to fighting the different diseases. So I'm going to find out more about HIV and also that the whole science behind HIV vaccines and just a potential to using these to find an HIV cure or to use it in cure strategies. Hi, Dr. Acho.
Hi, Sega. Nice
How you doing?
having me.
It's great to have you finally.
At long last. We've been planning this forever, haven't we?
Yes, but I'm glad it finally happened.
Yeah. We thank God for that. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been surviving. Yes. So today we're talking about HIV vaccines and we just want to know more about you. So kindly introduce yourself and share with us what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Acho and for Acho basically, and I'm a medical doctor by training, and I spent the first few years after med school working HIV programs that spans both the clinical part but also public health service delivery for HIV programs. And I got involved in advocacy around HIV vaccines and discussing with the community basically, and persons affected by HIV about what prevention looks like and what a vaccine is and what was in the pipeline around HIV vaccine research. And that's really what got me really more interested in in ending this epidemic really, because I think you know this, but I'll take Cameroon where I'm from. There are 500,000 people with HIV, and that gives a prevalence of about 2.7%. And there's a big need, other than the medical part, also the social part. There's a big need for HIV cure and vaccine research to end the health challenges, but also the social challenges that this poses. And that's what pushed me really to want to contribute more. And I'm currently studying a master's in immunology at the University of Oxford. And my goal down the line really is to become active in the HIV vaccine space. My current research group, the research group I am in, is the Rational Vaccine Research Group with Professor Persephone Burrows. And she's an HIV vaccine researcher, and she's also doing a big advocate for HIV vaccine research. And after this, I want to get more involved really in not just advocacy part, but also in the science part for contributing towards HIV vaccine research.
Yes, wow, you do a lot of things. You wear many hats and we love it for you. And also that you're not only in the science part of things, but also in the advocacy, the community, and just making sure that, the voices are heard, and also that you also make sure that you explain to them and they understand better. So I love that. And thank you so much for doing all this work and wearing many different hats, but making sure that you do every one of those roles to your best abilities. We want to know that when it comes to HIV vaccines or just generally vaccines, why are they important when it comes to ending HIV globally? Why is an HIV vaccine a very important tool for us to end HIV globally?
Yeah. The few vaccines are really a game changer because, as I mentioned before coming to this, I was working in HIV service delivery, and just the logistics around ensuring that health facilities have drugs to give for persons living with HIV, just the logistics of sorting out PrEP that you can procure PrEP drugs, and then you can effectively give it to all those at risk for HIV, so that they can take it and are not at risk. Just the logistics around managing pregnant women living with HIV, so to prevent transmission from. I feel we've gone a long way with biomedical interventions for prevention and treatment, but it's really challenging, right? It's so challenging. I've not worked on the cost side, but I can imagine buying and distributing this is also a lot of investment financially, and it needs, so for some mind, it's really just so costly, really. And now we look at the human perspective. Um, the adherence challenges, of course, for drug therapies, the risk of resistance after years on treatment, and all of those things. It really means that um, our progress towards with biomedical research, with drugs, should be viewed more like a stopgap strategy to prevent further infections, to prevent further mortality. But ultimately, we need to find a cure for people with HIV, find a therapeutic vaccine for people with HIV. We need to find a vaccine to prevent new infections, basically. I think that's the ultimate thing we need to ensure an AIDS-free generation. I think I like using that sentence because that was one of the mottos of Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, where I worked for a good number of years, and where my heart always is. So basically, we really need a vaccine to ensure an AIDS-free generation. And the reason for that is really that it is cheap. Once someone is vaccinated, essentially we might need booster doses, but essentially we've protected that person from infection subsequently. If we find a therapeutic vaccine that can cure an infection, then effectively we have stopped that. The person no longer needs to take treatment every day. The person is no longer resistant. So it really saves a lot of that. And beyond the hard facts and all the statistics, it's also about the person, right? It will essentially mean that more mothers could give birth to children without any risk of fear of transmission. It essentially means that persons living with HIV, if they get a therapeutic cure, who wouldn't have to bother about the stigma associated with that, wouldn't have to bother about taking pills every day. So I feel there's a human side to it, which is very powerful, why we need these. There's also a public health part of it, which is very why we need this. There's an economic side to it. So I feel all the reasons are there. It's just the science that is limiting us now. We don't have enough scientific capacity right now, and doesn't permit us to respond to all these needs. But the case for a vaccine is really, really strong. Even with the emergence of long-acting PrEP, which we probably need once a year, twice a year, even with the emergence of that, a vaccine is still a more beautiful alternative, because it's still you take it for a short period, you take it once, or you take a few doses, and it's sufficient for a lifetime, or it's sufficient for a long time. We don't know how, maybe 15, 20, 30 years, but a vaccine really covers a much longer time than long-acting PrEP will do. So, or long-acting therapy will do. So even with these advances in medical and in treatment and in prevention, which uses medications, a vaccine or an immune therapy really is still a much more beautiful alternative than them.
You did mention that when it comes to ARVs, the pills have been very effective over the years. A lot of people, and even with PMTCT, that we do have HIV-free babies because of how effective these pills are. And now the question then becomes that what are some of the main challenges that are there when it comes to developing an effective HIV vaccine?
Yeah. I feel if there were no challenges, if there were no challenges, then we would have had that a long time ago, right? Because research, for one, it's really difficult for vaccine research. And the reasons for this is virus related, as we have mentioned. There's a lot of diversity in the virus. There's a lot of high mutation rate of the virus. There's the fact that the virus goes into latency. So all of those are challenges for research, for vaccine research, and those are things we have discussed previously. And I would rather focus more on the fact that there's also, when you look at it across the world, you see research capacity is different. We need more funding for research then, because we know how diverse the virus is. We know how challenging it is to build a vaccine against HIV. We know how important it is for us to do this work, basically. But it's difficult. Why aren't there massive investments then to make this possible? Why isn't the whole world working on it at once? And I think one of the challenges is also the fact that it needs funding to do that. And some of the funders for HIV research is mostly the US. The NIH funds a lot of HIV research. Some pharma like Gilead and others fund vaccine research. The European Union and European researchers funded, but if you look at it, there's limited research in Africa because, first of all, economically the nations might not have large research budgets, so that limits the amount of research that they can do. The capacity for research, some research studies really need equipment that are not available in all facilities across Africa, for example. I keep using Africa because that's where I'm from, so I need to give realities that are closer to me. So it essentially means that despite the problem being mostly an African problem, researchers in that area might not be as involved as they wish to be, basically, because of economic reasons and also because of funding challenges. So that's also one point. So I think this and the challenges to why we are not doing more vaccine research are probably challenges that can be solved better by advocacy for better funding for vaccine research, advocacy for better frameworks to protect participants of vaccine research and all research studies, such that the community gains even more trust in participating in such studies and prevention. Because if we don't do those other aspects of it, it might be a bit challenging. So I really feel what is blocking us is more economic and technological. And if we can overcome those, if we could fund research and create an enabling environment for research studies with a lot of advocacy, then we just need probably a little bit more just patience, which has been shown for 40 years. There's been a lot of patience, but just to understand that science also takes time. And with the recent advancements that we've noticed in the last couple of years, it probably means the vaccine might not be too far off as it was. It's not 40 years away. If we can create the environment and create the funding for it, probably we could slowly overcome now the technological and the immunological challenges of the virus. We could overcome now ways of targeting latent virus, ways of targeting virus which are in immune privileged sites, ways of more potently neutralizing the virus, and ways of targeting conserved parts of the virus, basically. So I think, if we can overcome the socioeconomic aspects of it, then we create more room for researchers now to focus just on the immunological and virological parts of the research.
Yes, and I know that some people are going to say, but Acho has already explained why it's challenging, and I just wanted you to highlight those challenges so that they get to know and understand why currently in 2025 we don't have an HIV vaccine that is available, and that's so that they get to understand why, and also the role. You talked about advocacy, that we need more voices when it comes to HIV vaccine advocacy, and even just going down to country level, we need political will from our governments, from our leaders, and just investment to say that we're going to invest more money when it comes to HIV vaccine research and development, because we have very little to no HIV vaccine research in our different African countries. So we need that also. We need more voices from the community, and we have different programs like the HIV Vaccine Academy from the International AIDS Society, which I was part of it last year in December 2024. But also the fun fact is that I was actually supposed to be part of the 2023 the 2023 cohort, which you were part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
I
and then
feel
now,
we were meant to meet, right?
yes. And then earlier on you mentioned about having when it comes to access, and so then what does global access mean, and how can we make sure that people in low income countries get the future HIV vaccine when it is there and it's an effective one?
Yeah. Um, I feel before we come to that, we just building on the point of advocacy again. Just picture this. If it's true we say there's lack of funding and all that, but just picture if all of us advocates were working so hard and pressuring all our governments, and we have 54 governments in Africa, and if even if they could just commit to spend maybe $1 million or $2 million into an HIV research pool, which is a locally funded HIV research program, and then that is given to the most promising researchers. That ensures continuous research funding for the most promising research work that is going on in Africa every year. I think we will have a really strong, powerful HIV research pool of researchers going on, and that could sustain their work, and they will be able to focus on answering these questions and ensuring that eventually we have an HIV vaccine research, HIV vaccine, which is an African HIV vaccine, basically. So it's just not to minimize the role of advocacy in all of this, and just emphasize again that as advocates, we have a powerful role to play in ensuring that policymakers and decision makers listen and take action and not wait too long. And this beautifully leads into what the question you're asking now about equity. And we really need a lot of equity. We need a lot of advocacy to ensure equity in distribution. Because I'll give two examples. When there was a lot of vaccine hoarding, right? Rich nations and more advanced nations developed vaccines and hoarded them. And because they wanted to protect their nations, one might understand it at some level, but again, we are all humans. So we need to think of humanity first before we start thinking about nationalities. But again, just to show why it is important for research to be done in our setting, why it's important for us to get involved in this research. And the second point I want to bring up is the long-acting antiretrovirals, which are being introduced for PrEP and possibly for treatment. And the cost of those treatments might mean that it will not be available as first-line public health intervention in many African countries, because the budget of the Ministry of Health, the budgets for HIV programs will not permit those drugs, right, for those who really need it. And again, that still comes down and that still doubles down on the role of advocacy. We need advocacy to start right at the level of trial research, that for each trial, if we're doing a trial in Africa, if we're doing a trial anywhere, we need volunteers, because trials are done with volunteers to test if these drugs or if these vaccines are efficacious. And we need to ensure right at that level that eventually, if these trials are successful, then those who volunteered and participated in proving this, they or their children or their brothers and sisters can access it even. We don't want to participate in trials to prove that there's to produce a scientific knowledge for something and then not be able to benefit from it. And that will not only work with advocates, but that works with policymakers. Policymakers are ones that ensure that. So that we really need advocacy at that level to ensure the availability of these treatments, and keep away such factors like vaccine hoarding, to keep away cost barriers. We also, for equity and accessibility of these, we also need to do advocacy around health systems, not just around the cost part. Because some vaccines, if we eventually have a vaccine, then they might need more stringent cold chains. Maybe we might have vaccines that need cold chains of maybe -20, I don't know, -80. And ensuring those cold chains is not available everywhere. So but we need those in a healthcare system. So we need advocates even at that level to ensure that health systems are more resilient, because that will ensure that they can answer to the health problems of today even. And eventually, if a vaccine comes out, they might be able to participate in the logistics of distribution of those vaccines, so that not just those who are living in urban areas can benefit from them, but even those who are in the most distant areas can benefit from those. So we also need advocacy for, in as much as we are HIV vaccine advocates, I think we should be health advocates basically, to ensure that our health systems are also very resilient, and the day vaccine becomes available, not just those in the urban areas, but everybody really can benefit from that. And above everything, since these are a bit far off, the vaccine part is far off, we really need advocacy around research, because we need volunteers for studies. For every study, we need volunteers really. And if we don't have people participating in studies, if we don't have people being involved in studies, then we won't have the data to show efficacy or not. So we also need a lot of advocates educating, like what you're doing. You're a wonderful advocate, basically, educating people around what is in the research pipeline, what can they do to get involved, and such that we will be able to build powerful studies which can answer these pressing questions about efficacy of vaccines and effectiveness of vaccines, and be able to generate the evidence we need to produce these vaccines. So I really think advocacy is the questions of equity and access. For me, down the line, we need to start answering them now by the work we are doing to advocate for more research, and the work we are doing in advocacy right now, such that when those things come up, we won't start answering equity questions then. We would have already set the groundwork now for there to be no equity or inequity questions down the line.
Okay, and I like how you also just gave examples of just, when it comes to cost and access about on the long-acting injectables. And I'm just going to give, like, here in Botswana, that it was launched like in 2022, late 2022, that Botswana is going to start rolling out these long-acting injectables for PrEP in 2023. But because of all the cost and everything, it was postponed, and it's only this year in May, last month, it was just launched to say that yes, now long-acting injectables are currently available in Botswana, but they're only available at the capital city, in Gaborone only. And they're saying that because of that, they have very limited amount. People need to go through an assessment, and you have to qualify to actually get the long-acting injectable as PrEP. So you can just see now the dynamics of just access in our different African countries, and also just the cost to that. So just thank you for explaining that. And while we're talking about long-acting injectables, so then what's the difference between these long-acting injectables like the CAB-LA and an HIV vaccine? What's the difference? Are they not vaccines?
Right? One could think of them like a vaccine, right? If you define a vaccine as something you give to prevent subsequent infection, one could take them like a vaccine, right? But the nuance is, again, that vaccines are more focused on the immune system. So a vaccine is something you give to train your immune system to be able to fight off an eventual infection. And long actings are drugs that you take. So they're more like prophylaxis. They are drugs that you take, even though you're injected with them. They are drugs. They're not. We inject vaccines, but we also inject drugs, right? We inject antibiotics every day. So the fact that the injections shouldn't confuse us to think they are vaccines also. So they are just drugs which are injected. And what happens is that they are released slowly, and they maintain a certain concentration of the drug in the blood system, in the system of the host. And that means that if the person eventually becomes exposed to HIV, the virus cannot grow because there's an antiviral, there's an antiviral which is in the host system that will prevent replication of the virus, basically. So it essentially means that the person constantly has an adequate level of antiviral drugs in their body that prevents the virus from replicating. And that the virus will be killed by the drugs which are in their system. Which is different from what an vaccine does, is that the vaccine trains your immune system such that your immune system knows how to identify and kill off infections. And the advantage of a vaccine is that it is often lifelong, or it lives for for decades. And that means that once you're vaccinated once and you have protective immunity, then your body has been trained to be able to fight off all the virus eventually, if ever it gets into the system. Which is different from the long-acting, because once the amount of drug which is slowly being released from the site of injection into the body goes down, then the person is again at risk of infection. And that's why most long-actings are maybe 6 months. So you need to take them twice a year, for example, so that they maintain the level of the drug in the body at a constant level, at a constant threshold, which can prevent viral growth. So that's the difference. So one is not an immunotherapy, the other is an immune drug, and the length of the duration of protection is also much different. Yeah, but both of them are methods of protection, just that one is medical, one is immune.
Okay, so now that we know the difference, so could vaccines and these long-acting injectables be used together in the future to help people be HIV free, or to keep people to be HIV free? Since one is this and then the other is that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think they are all complementary, right? And they are all different natures. I think when you have a problem, you start solving it with which tools you have available to you. And yesterday, what we had were drugs that were taken every day, and efficacious in treating infections for close to 30 years, and they are very wildly effective. Now we have long actings, which means that people probably don't need to take drugs every day for PrEP. You don't need to take drugs every day to prevent infection. You can do that 2 shots twice a year, and you are essentially protected from infection. And if you look at it, the logical next step is that you need 1 shot a year, maybe, and then maybe you need 1 shot, and that's it. So I think the fact that we should think of them like steps towards the ideal HIV prevention tool. And what will happen if we build a vaccine? It means that once you take the vaccine, then you are protected from infection eventually. You don't need a second or a third or a fourth shot every year. And also, we might also look at it like it might answer different use cases. So maybe there's someone who in the future, there might be someone who had an allergic response, who is allergic to some component of the vaccine, or who has a reaction to vaccine, and those people might benefit from long-acting methods of prevention. So I feel these are just more tools we are adding to our vaccine arsenal, to our prevention arsenal, such that eventually we might have enough tools to answer to any need of prevention, any prevention need of any individual down the line. But we're always grateful for what we have, and we work with those. Yeah.
All right. So the idea is for us to basically just have more options. And now when we're talking about options, for people living with HIV, how might these therapeutic vaccines or the long-acting treatments help them live without having to take pills every single day?
Yeah.
And how do they work also?
Yeah. So if you look at again, I feel it's just step-by-step thing. You remember, if you remember before, at the start when treatment started coming out, there were multiple pills multiple times a day.
Yes.
And after eventually we were able to make single dose formulations where it was 1 pill once a day, and that has served well for a long time. And now we are in the age of, we think there are options out there, and hopefully they will eventually be approved already. But there are really trials that have shown one pills on different days a week. So people might skip days for a week using DTG-based regimens, basically. So those are still options. And eventually we'll have long-acting treatments, which is once also injectables also, which can be used for treatment, not just prevention also. It's just the clinical trials to really solidify this so that it can enter policy. But injectables once every 2 months, or once every 4 months, or once every 6 months. I think if we just look at it as different steps in that journey towards the ideal, which will be curative treatment. You take it and you don't even need to take the treatment again. So I will look at it more in that direction, and having those options will serve different purposes. That people who cannot take one drug for one reason or the other, so they might need a different type of prevention. So that's it. So so if we can build long-acting antiretrovirals where people need to take it once every year or once or twice every year, that will help us that will help us in reducing the issue of adherence. It means you don't need to take it every day. That helps. It might be less costly even, because you don't need to produce as many drugs. That may help us with preventing subsequent infections, because there will be no rebound or something. There will be no time of poor adherence. That will help us with mother-to-child transmission and all those type of things. That will help us with drug resistance. So I feel long-actings will help with that. If we can go further and build a cure or through a therapeutic vaccine, then we are really in the ideal world where we can completely eradicate the infection in the host, basically. So in that case, that will mean there will be no need for drugs again. The person has been cured. So, but again, I feel we're in this fantasy world. No, it's not a fantasy world, but we are thinking like 10, 15 years, 20 years down the line. And those are the things we wish for. Those are the things we want to see in our lifetimes. And the nice part about it is that the science is kind of showing us that those are possible. Because if you look at all the laws of biology and physics, it basically shows it's all possible. And once something is not scientifically impossible, it means eventually it will happen. So that's the reassurance I have, that those are eventual things that will happen. It's a question of when, and not a question of if.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, and we are very much, very, very hopeful that they will happen in our lifetime, like you're saying, that when it comes to science, progress has been made so far. And you also mentioned the importance of advocacy, having community, that when it comes to just research, you do need, to do clinical trials, and just doing trials. So now we want to get into the science part, to say that we currently have a lot of researchers on HIV vaccines. So what kind of trials are currently happening? And also, are young people or community members involved in all these researches that are currently ongoing?
Yeah. So I think clinical trials for HIV, I feel bad for the clinical trialists, because they've done a lot of clinical trials and some of them have not shown as much efficacy as they might have wished. So it might have been a bit disappointing to be a clinical trialist, to be running clinical trials, right? And but science, that's the thing. They probably just need one good trial to show efficacy, and that's it. But focusing on, we started talking about BNAPs then. There's some trials that were carried out basically around 2016. The first BNAP trial, they call them the antibody-mediated protection trials, trials. And they were trying to see if body-neutralizing antibodies can confer protection against infection. And what they showed is that if they use a body-neutralizing antibody, it was able to neutralize some strains of the virus, basically. Some strains of the virus that were susceptible to that neutralizing antibody will be neutralized. And that was a good sign. And now the current research that is going on is being able to learn from what we have done in treatment by combining multiple BNAbs. So there's research ongoing now to combine different types of BNAbs to see if they can be efficacious in neutralizing, in protecting against the available strains of HIV, basically. So you could use 3 BNAbs. You could potentially neutralize all the strains that are out there, and you could confer reasonably good protection that can be used in a public health intervention. So that's the now is towards combining different BNAbs. And as I mentioned earlier, they have also done, the HIV envelope is so difficult to study because that's the target that most BNAbs bind to, and that most antibodies that are being developed are trying to bind to. So they have been able to build stabilized versions of the HIV envelope so that they can do more studies with those. And those have also been used to go to guide production, as we were talking earlier, guide the development of BNAbs, guide their from precursor B cells through the steps until they're able to produce BNAbs. So so you call it targeting germline precursors, basically, for the production of BNAbs. And if you can do that also, that's also like, it will not be passive immunity again. That's actually be vaccine production, right? And that will help in actually ensuring that we can do more protection studies. And so but those are still ongoing. There have been some good studies in non-human primates also, which have shown efficacy in that direction. But again, like in science, everything takes time. I think that's something that's emerging, which is a good field of research. And building further, there's also just the way clinical trials are done now. There's a lot of work in engaging the community with involving advocates on the boards of the committees overseeing these clinical trials, such that the community feels more involved in these trials, and it's not just researchers from the West coming into Kenya or coming to South Africa and doing studies and going back, basically, but involving participants from the conception of these trials to the train, basically. So that's also a welcome change over the last couple of years that has been done. There have been some studies that have tried to do, basically, take different parts of the virus from different strains of the virus. They call them using antigens, basically. A mosaic is something like, a mosaic is basically constituted of different parts. So trying to build vaccines from parts of different strains of different types of HIV, such that it could confer protection against a large variety of HIV viruses, basically, and hopefully that coverage will be more effective. But unfortunately, those have not been the most efficacious, and I think they published the results of some of those in 2023 for some of those trials that have been going, but they were not there's not a lot of efficacy there as the researchers had wanted. And what other researchers now are doing is basically, the interesting research that's going on is also looking at T cell responses, because there's been a strong movement, and which is the primary movement now is towards being broadly neutralizing antibodies, but there's also the secondary pathway is towards priming T cells. So I keep saying T cells. Let me just give a simple analogy for us to get it. I know everybody gets this, but I'll just put it to make it clear. Like B cells produce antibodies, and antibodies bind the virus, and then they eliminate the virus. T cells, so CD8 T cells, and there are CD8 T cells and CD4 T cells. CD4 T cells are what the virus infects, and CD8 T cells help the immune system by surveying the immune system and the whole body, and seeing any cell that is infected with anything. So if a cell is sick, T cells kill that cell so that the cell doesn't infect that cells. So they've been building vaccines. Other researchers are focused on building vaccines that specifically want to guide T cells towards infected cells that are actively infected with HIV, so that they could kill those cells. And if they do that, then they would have eliminated the HIV that is in those cells, or the HIV that was in the reserve, that was latent in those cells. So there's a lot of research also to prime T cells, so that they could be more effective in their surveillance of the body to find and identify infected cells and kill them. And this is where they were working. Some researchers, like I think Professor Thomas Hanke, what they're doing is trying to, and other researchers, they're not the only ones, trying to target T cells towards highly conserved parts of the virus so that they could eliminate infected cells, basically. And other researchers who are doing research towards identifying, towards using different vectors, like the studies we're talking about in primates. Those are T-cell viral vaccines, basically. And if they could translate that into humans, that would also be wonderful. But above that, there's a lot of new things that are coming up in immunology. As I mentioned earlier, they have what we call viral vectors. Like, so as we're saying, I just feel that all this research around now using around the vaccine vectors and how the vaccination is done, basically using different vectors, whether using viruses to carry the immunogen or using mRNA as a way of delivering the immunogen. I think all of those have made vaccine research a lot faster. And then there are even new advances in research so that you could do different trials at the same time, basically. So that all the advances make it easier for researchers to test the hypothesis and test what they are doing. And even with the emergence of AI, it becomes possible to screen immunogens better, to screen potential vaccine candidates better, and all this computational work should make it possible for us to develop vaccines a lot faster, basically. So I think with the tools advancing, the research, the immunology is advancing too, and all of this is creating the perfect storm for us to be able to advance vaccine research.
All right. Wow. That was a lot of information that I believe, we had, some of us had questions on to say that, okay, clinical trials, but are we there? Are we not? And what's happening? So thank you for just letting us in and explaining what's happening. And also now when we're just closing it off, we're heading towards the end and we're closing it off. And we talked about community voices earlier on, and now when we're talking about HIV vaccines, how can we as a community support vaccines as well as the injectables research, and then what should we expect to happen next?
So I wish I had a crystal ball where I could look into it and say what we should see, what is coming next. But unfortunately, I don't. But I really feel what advocates are doing is really important, and it's one of the key things that we need to do and continue doing. We need to do advocacy at different levels, and when they talk about advocacy, it's not just how different people view advocacy, but I feel like such like your podcast, excuse me, like what the podcast you're doing, talking to your policymakers about research work we're doing, building international coalitions, because I really just feel we should stop also. I'm talking because my perspectives are a lot focused on Africa because I'm an African, and I spoke with someone, a very, very brilliant guy. He's called Bambage. He's a cardiovascular researcher, but he doesn't, he views we should stop looking at things like Cameroonian and Senegalese and Tanzanian and no, but we are too far, we've been left too far behind to think that we will need to look at things at a global, at an African level, at a minimum. What is good for Africa? And what is good is that we should be able to build coalitions across multiple nations. Like, your advocacy work, we should be able to have networks of advocates across Africa so that we could put pressure on not just our governments, but on the AU or on Gavi or on
Yes.
multiple institutions that can have bigger burden, bigger impact on funding for research or on facilitating clinical trials or on supporting early career researchers or on building research capacity in our countries, but also put pressure on pharmaceuticals to provide drugs to convert, I don't know, government loans, like government debt into investments for public health, for example. So if the government owes the World Bank, I don't know, this amount of money, and they invest an equivalent amount in their public health programs, in their HIV programs, then that should be forgiven. So I feel we should think about forming those international coalitions and doing our advocacy beyond our national borders. I know it's uncomfortable, but it is what we need to do because we are living in a world where we can't afford to do things from our comfort level since the stakes are so high. We are talking of people's lives. So if we can really aim high, aim big, like you're doing your podcast is a national. I don't think your podcast, Sika. So
Yeah.
I think we should also just we should consider this really thinking Africa first, and at that level we will be able to put more pressure on pharmaceuticals, on governments, on international institutions to facilitate to facilitate our work at all levels, not just at the clinical, at hospital, at the research level, but also at the cost of procurement or public health strategy and all that, and even monitoring and data collection because those are important too. So that's the only thing I would really put in. That's really my only perspective for the advocacy we do. We should really um, go international, form a strong movement, and maybe with that movement, we could be able to effect the change we dream to see. Yeah, because in the end, I really feel advocates are big dreamers, and we need big steps to make those dreams reality.
Wow, that's very powerful. A powerful way to end our episode today, and just put Africa first. Come together as different Africans, advocates, researchers, come together and just make sure that the African Union actually does what it's supposed to do. When it comes to and also just go beyond. We're not talking about research, HIV vaccine research, and just putting the money in there. So thank you so much, Dr. Acho, for the time that you put in. I know this was very long and it was very informative. You really poured your heart out, and thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much, Seka. Honestly, it's so much. I really admire the work you're doing, and I really believe in what you're doing. I feel we could really do a lot. Well, once we do it collectively, and once we want to do it well as well as you want to do what you do your work. And your energy also inspires those around you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I really believe very much in this vision, and I hope that come each year, we
Mm-hmm.
would see a lot of progress in the HIV space in Africa, but across the world. But yeah, so I share this vision of yours, and I hope we can really bring change.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please comment on the comment section, and we will try and answer them. And also later on, we will share some resources if you want to read more on HIV vaccines, as well as some of the work that Dr. Acho is doing. Yes, but most importantly, let us come together as Africa in one voice. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.